I never thought I would say this at the start of the year, as someone who predicted that the Boston Celtics would not make the playoffs. Welcome on to a Sunday night edition of the pod. Danny is in ultra Sunday night mode here. And we are going to talk about the trade deadline coming up. But first, though, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to Dunked On Prime if you're listening on the free feed. Never a better chance to do it. You can use the code MOCKDeadline26, and that will get you a 35% discount off the yearly price of Dunked On Prime. So we'd love for you to take advantage of that. And of course, you will get the mock deadline, which you're hoping to record in just over a week's time. But to get us ready for all of that, I think it's important to go through all of the teams as we do every single year. And I think we can begin, Danny, with the team that we will be broadcasting on the NBA Strategy stream on Wednesday against the Pacers at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific, the Boston Celtics.
The Celtics will be trying to get revenge in that game after a Pacers win about a week or two ago. But the Celtics, illegal screen. But the Celtics are a fascinating team in terms of the trade deadline because you have new owner Bill Chisholm in control. Of course, a lot of the same people involved in making decisions, but why the Celtics are so fascinating is this duality. So Boston, with Jason Tatum out for the year, presumably with ruptured Achilles that occurred during the playoffs, we knew they were going to shed money, and they did so. They got out of the second apron, but they're still into the tax. The Celtics are roughly $12 million into the tax as we record this podcast. So you have that idea that, hey, this is kind of a gap year. We're trying to save money. And I'll note at the outset, we'll talk about this a lot over the course of this pod and the other preview pods, that shedding money in season is harder now than it used to be due to the aprons. So it's harder for other teams and all that type of stuff. But you have that, but then you also have the Celtics being very successful to start this year. And so how much does ownership want to shed? How much do they want to keep this together? And then how much does, what is the cost of getting cheaper in not only in terms of 25, 26, but in terms of 26, 27, when hopefully Jason Tatum will be available?
Yeah, and so much to talk about here. They've been unexpectedly successful, basically the best team in basketball by the numbers since the calendar flipped over to the beginning of December, and their offense has been excellent. They've been playing a much more movement-oriented style than in the past, when it was kind of just pick on the mismatch and then use our 5-out spacing. And so they've been really effective with that. Now, Simons, I think he's been an important player for them, but he's coming off the bench for a reason. Peyton Pritchard has long surpassed him in the eyes of Joe Mazzulla. And so he's the guy who, in theory, is the matching salary. Probably any other matching salary you could talk about. They're not going to trade Peyton Pritchard, too good a value contract. So Sam Hauser is the other one, making about $10 million. Also a very valuable piece, though. He's held up defensively in the playoffs. Started off cold this season, but now is shooting his usual 40% from deep on pretty good volume. So he's a valuable player. I think his contract to me is about neutral value, making $10 million. He's just started that extension right now. Gradual raises goes up to 12 over the next 3 seasons after this one. So the idea of getting completely out of the tax would be wouldn't really be possible, even if they moved Hauser. Maybe they could get there by moving multiple minimum guys and then for nothing, and then re-signing minimum guys as well. And they've got a couple, like Chris Boucher isn't really playing. Like it would probably make sense for them to just try to dump him anyway as a minimum salary. Xavier Tillman not really playing. So if you could just dump those guys and then play the 13 guys on the roster game for a little bit. I haven't done the exact math to show whether Sam Hauser and then getting rid of Tillman and Boucher would get you out of there. As it stands right now, they are 12 million over the tax.
Yeah, my instinct is that getting all the way out of the tax is probably going to be too big an ask for the Celtics. And the other logistical challenge with it is that, like, you can use Anfernee Simons to reduce your salary, like theoretically if they could find a trade partner, but that's probably going to have other consequences. Like maybe it's a longer contract for less money this year. But then that has other ripples for the Celtics too.
I really view this transaction cycle. I never thought I would say this at the start of the year, as someone who predicted that the Boston Celtics would not make the playoffs. Was I think this is actually a really great chance for the Boston Celtics to improve their team. And part of the reason I say that is because Anfernee Simons is an unrestricted free agent. He's really their biggest tradable salary. Brown, Tatum both making over 50, Derek White making just under 30. Those guys aren't going anywhere, presumably, as matching salary. And I think that they need to add another high level player. Yeah, they've got Gonzalez, they've got Jordan Walsh, Pritchard's a little bit better. But if they really, especially if you want to win a championship, compete with those behemoths out west, not to mention even get out of the east, I think they need another high level of starter. And we can talk about the assets that they have to go and get that player. But the matching salary issue is more interesting to me. It's basically Simons and Hauser, and they've got a little bit of headroom over the second apron, but because they're over the first apron, they wouldn't be able to take back more than about 38 million or so in salary, the combined amount of Simons and Hauser in a potential deal. Unless you could throw in a couple of minimums, maybe that would help you, but or at least one. So the question to me then becomes like, yeah, okay, maybe if you don't find anything, you could hopefully re-sign Simons at a palatable number on a tradable contract, go through this dance, or you could even sign and trade him as well, go through this dance at a later point. But I think they should try to make the upgrade. So what do they need?
You could go in a couple different directions. I mean, I think if we're talking about the Celtics potentially as a high level contender, I think it's a center to me. Is as much as Neemias Queta has played well, I think that getting a center, ideally, we saw the Celtics at their best when they had a 4 spacing, 5 out, all that type of stuff. But at least somebody who can provide a defensive foundation. Now, I think it is somewhat impressive that they're league average this year on defense when you consider like that they have such a weak overall center rotation. But still, it's a lot to ask.
No, it is, and getting Jason Tatum back, hopefully, even if he's not at the height of his powers this year, by next year, he at least he's a very valuable defensive player, and I think he could help quite a bit. He may end up kind of just being more of a power forward. I think he has power forward size, and he can even guard centers at times as well. So I would say a center would be my first look as well. And ideally, it would be someone that would also enable you to reduce salary from Simon, save some money against the tax. But again, they can't legally do a trade that would get them all the way out of the tax and send out Simons and take back enough for salary matching. So here are the names. I think among centers that would be a potential option. Ivica Zubac is the first one that comes to mind. Now the Clippers are playing better. He is still someone I think they want to build around in the summer of 2027. But if actually, I guess before we even get into that, let's just talk about what they have to trade.
The Celtics are they're lightly encumbered in terms of first. So they owe a swap right to the Spurs in 2028 that is top 1 protected. And then they owe their 2029 first. It's got a complicated thing that's going to be routed, but they owe their 29 first to either Portland or Washington. So outside of that, they're pretty flexible. So due to Seppian, they could do 26,
and their 2032 first is frozen as well because they're in the second.
That's right. Yeah. So they could trade a few. They could trade their 31 and either their 26 or 27 is probably the cleanest way to do it. But then there are other swaps, there are other things they could do, and then they also they're pretty solid on so they have a couple of extra seconds, and then they owe a few of theirs moving forward, but they're not like some of these teams. They're just completely screwed.
Yeah, that's interesting, and so that's basically 2 firsts. Is that enough to get you Ivica Zubac? I mean, I think in a vacuum that's about right for him, and he does only make 18. Clippers would probably have to send a little something back as well to make that trade legal with Simons going out. However, I don't think that the Clippers want to do that deal because they're now this Kawhi Leonard has some knee soreness. Chris Haynes says it's not serious, but he is leaving the road trip to go back. We'll see how not serious that is. Leaving the road trip is usually not a great sign, but the Clippers, yeah, I think if I were them, I probably would do that deal just because I think Zubats is going to have an extension. Confirm that. Hopefully, I'm not confusing with Jakob Poeltl. Yeah, no, he doesn't have an extension that kicks in, but he is under contract in 27. So he's gonna be making about this much the next 2 years, but about to turn 29, been a little bit less effective this year. If that were the package for me for the Clippers, I would do it. I don't get the impression that they would. That's in terms of other long-term options. Daniel Gafford would be another one potentially. Now he's only making 14 this year. He is tradable. The maybe also you could try to get like say Najee Marshall or something from the Mavericks. And all right, so, like if I could do my 26 first for Daniel Gafford, would you do that deal, Danny? And or maybe it's just filler coming back
I
and
think
have
it
have a
would
ton of that.
be because the nice thing about Gafford is he doesn't have to be your only center. Like he's already played with another successful center, so he
Yeah.
could be a part of the
But he
mix.
can't be your only center. That's
that's
kind of
that's
my
true.
concern for him. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, is he even better than Nemias Queta?
Well, the idea I think of this, that would be that you'd have both of them. Maybe are those
Yeah.
two players good enough? It's not Lively in Gafford, but I mean, Kata's had a nice year, so like maybe that gets you enough of the way there that you can then use resources elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess is he and Queta is under contract for next year, which really helps. He has a team option. Maybe that could enable them to get him on a longer term deal that would be palatable to them. And they also have Luca Garza under contract for next year as well. That is not a team option, however. But yeah, is Daniel Gafford good enough defensively? I'm not really sure. I think I don't know that putting him out there is going to get you back to being a top 5 defense necessarily. And he also is kind of the same pitch as Nemias Queta as just a rim rolling center. Might be a little better finisher around the basket, but probably worse on defense than Queta has been. And also has really struggled to stay healthy with this ankle issue himself. So I think that's not good enough for me. I need a higher level of starter than that because both with the matching salary and now this year they should be able to trade a 2033 first, right? That's the other thing too. If you wait until the draft, you could trade if you wanted to, you could trade 26, 27, 30 or 31 and 33. So that would be a lot better for the Celtics.
Mm-hmm.
And could really enable them to go after start. But then you have the matching salary issue as well, unless Simons were amenable to a sign and trade.
Nate, it's a
So
very
yeah,
different theory, but would you talk to former exec Austin Ainge about Walker Kessler?
yeah, it is a different theory. I probably not because now the math would be impossible on a sign and trade this offseason because Kessler makes so little, but Kessler's out for the year. So no, I think you want someone who would help you this year. And like he is probably a good enough player to me that I might try to make that offer. But I think if he were playing right now, that would make a lot of sense. But yeah, I don't think that's the answer either. How about Nick Claxton?
He's a different theory. I don't think he's the same type of guy quite as Daniel Gafford. He at times can be a little switchier, though he's not always the best at that. I think Claxton, so maybe I guess you could say for Boston, this isn't as big a negative. I think Claxton's like his contract's a little bit bigger than his overall play. He's making over 20 million the next couple of years, and so that for a like kind of a more of a lower end starter. I mean, I guess we're getting closer to that money. So so like were you talking thing like Simons for Claxton, something like that? So for the Nets, you get
Yeah,
off of that money.
yeah, it would
If
be.
that's
And
all it cost, like I wouldn't give up I don't think I'd give up a good first for it, but if that's all it
well,
was basically a mechanism.
just your 26 first.
Hmm.
Wouldn't do that.
I don't think I'd do it with my 26 first personally. They have a couple good seconds though. They have I think New Orleans second this coming year. That's pretty good. I'd do that.
Yeah, Nick Claxton. I mean, he's having one of his better seasons, and he is a different pitch than Kada. And you also at least your 26 first is now Now the Nets are trying to win next year, right? Like they might say that's not enough for Nick Claxton. I think he's been better. Also, he has a declining salary, which would help the Celtics at least a little bit going forward. His rim protection has been better this year, but he also can switch. And then I think he would fit in pretty well with the new way that they're playing offense, which is more pick and rolls, running a little bit more through the center, changing sides. And then he can add an element that Kata doesn't on offense of being a little bit better a passer, also like fake DHO, take a couple of dribbles. I'd like to see if he could make a free throw consistently in the playoffs. So that was a concern the last time he was in that situation against the Celtics. I would think about that. I would think about that, particularly because he is under contract and could also be matching salary going forward as well. But I wouldn't. He's not a two first guy to me, particularly considering like he's been better this year, but he's also had some down years. But I think he would fit into their ability to switch, right? I mean, if you think about putting him out there with White, Tatum, Brown, that would be pretty useful. So I think he it's more maybe about the type of player he is necessarily than quite the quality. That's interesting. That's like right on the borderline. I don't know that the Nets would want to do that for the 24th pick in the draft or whatever it's going to end up being, though. Especially because they don't have their pick next year and they're going to want to take a step forward. I think that's about it on the centers that I'm particularly enamored of. I mean, maybe there's this fantasy that they could get Al Horford back. I don't think the Warriors would want to do that. Um, and I don't think they would want to give up their 26th first just to do that for Horford. I mean, I think the Warriors would bite on that, but that's probably too much again. They would have higher hopes. If the Bucks had a fire sale, Miles Turner would be someone that I think would be pretty interesting. Again, a different pitch than what they have with their existing centers. I don't think he's going to be available though. Brook Lopez would be interesting too, but like again, you're not going to give up a first for him. Matching salary there also an issue. I think I'd probably rather hold on to Hauser than have Brook Lopez, especially considering the ages. So yeah, I don't really see much else, honestly. I guess one other would be could you do Simons for Yusuf Nurkic and something else coming back from the Jazz? The Jazz have anything else that they would want? I don't think so. That would be like any of their rookie contract players.
I don't think necessarily the ones that the Jazz would be willing to trade. Like, I don't think they're Collier would actually be a fascinating roll of the dice for the Celtics, but I don't think
Yeah.
that the Jazz would do something like that.
Yeah, I think probably not. Um, like Taylor Hendricks would be a pretty interesting one too, but he has struggled coming back from that leg issue. That would be more of a long term play, possibly. Um, yeah, again, yeah, I don't think that the Jazz would really be too interested in that either. Like Kyle Anderson, probably just not, and Nurkic, like that's not really sexy enough. And I don't really think Nurkic helps them too much either. Like he's a body, but I don't think he's better than Garza or Kata. What about any other position?
I thought about the possibility of them getting another creator. I mean, Jaylen Brown has taken real strides this year getting that opportunity. I think that would be more just if the right player were available. And as much as like the coming free agent class has some compelling point guards, guys like Kobe White, I don't think that, first of all, the Celtics can't really be in on the big money guys, the Jaws and LaMelos of the world. But they also like it's kind of a too tight a needle to thread, I would say. Like I brought up Kobe White. Like, if there's a way that you could get him and think that you could pay him his next contract, I think White would be a fascinating fit because he can play on and off the ball and all these other things. But getting him is hard, and paying him might be harder considering their other constraints.
How about Simons, Hauser, and Boucher for Michael Porter Jr.? Probably got to put at least two first in that deal.
Hmm.
And obviously you got to balance the roster spots a little bit. You have to
Yeah.
take back something small for the Nets.
And MPJ is expensive, but he's not expensive forever. So there's something useful kind of potentially there for the Celtics. Hmm. I think there are versions of the Celtics where I think Michael Porter Jr. would really help, but I think using those firsts for giving you a defensive foundation, using those for a couple other things, that's more the way I would use their resources.
Yeah, I guess to me, it's really I'm making this trade now. If I think, okay, if we get 90 to 95% of Jason Tatum back next year, and this guy's on the team, that we're the clear East favorites and feel like we can compete with the West. I'm not sure that Porter Jr. is quite that because of his individual defensive limitations. Like, I think his brand might be a little bit too strong at the moment, even though he is playing very well for
Well,
Brooklyn. And
and his extensive injury history, because if he's not that guy for the Celtics next year, then that's going to hurt a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. Although I mean, his extensive injury history, was a shoulder last year in the playoffs, and I mean, he really hasn't since he had that second back injury. He's been pretty reliable. Okay, I think that's probably enough on the Celtics. I think
Um,
most likely to trade is probably Boucher just to
yes,
save money against the tax.
yeah, it's the old school thing of guy who's not playing, you trade him, replace him with with rest of the season minimum, or even do the 13-man dance as long as you can. I agree, Boucher.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, maybe they could really get if there was another team that really liked Gonzalez or Walsh, maybe then they could get in the mix with some of the guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. is someone that popped out to me because he's only making 35 this year. Now, again, I don't know what the Celtics appetite is going to be to go into the second apron and be in the repeater tax. Like that really gets prohibitive once you get above the second apron to have the repeater tax as well. So they may because Jaron, remember, he makes 35 this year, but then he bumps up into the mid 40s next year. Unfortunately, I don't think they have the scratch to get him now. I don't know if he's even available now. If they went to the offseason, then the only way they could do it would be after the draft, but then Jaron would go up to 49 million. You couldn't make that deal beforehand. And also uh like to get him at that lower 35 number. Because if the whole idea of trading for him would be now you have your 2033 available, but you also just traded your 2026 because that's available at the time of the draft, but all that timing would not work out. But getting another level of player like at that type would be pretty interesting to me. Okay, so Boucher most likely to be traded. Let's move on to we'll skip around to the Pacific Division here, the Golden State Warriors.
And I think the place to start with the Warriors is some of their constraints. So the Warriors are hard capped at the second apron, and they are seemingly mere pennies away from it. They're a couple 100,000 away from the second apron. So that means that the only way the Warriors can net add money in a trade is if they sent out money in a different trade. So like they can't add basically any additional salary. Now they can still combine players, they can do some of the other tricks, but the net deal can't add money to their books unless they've sent off players. And one of the other challenges with the Warriors is that they don't have a lot of extraneous stuff on their books. Like they don't have, those easy, like, oh, $5 million guy, another team would be interested and we're willing to let him go. Like they don't really have a ton of those players. So the Warriors could be motivated. We can talk about their motivations, but that's one thing to mention is basically they can't add, the base assumption has to be they can't add salary in a trade.
Yep, that's it. And of course, they have Jonathan Kuminga at 22.5. They got Buddy Hield, who's not playing, as it was stated in a recent piece by a unnamed Warriors player. $33 million sitting on the bench, not playing at all. And then also the other theoretical matching salary would be Moses Moody making 11.5. So they could get up a little bit over 40 million in terms of matching salary, but as you noted, they would have to not take back a cent more than what they are sending out, and obviously bringing those guys some aggregation would bring some roster spot issues possibly. Also, in terms of assets going forward, they have everything except the bottom 10 of their 2030 first. It would make sense if they do a move for something that's way out in the future to trade the protected part of that because then they also can't trade a 29 or a 31 first right now. And then you would run into difficulty. But they could trade 26, 28, the protected part of that 2030 first, the top 20 of it, and then 32. So they could trade 4 firsts right now, and they have all their swaps available as well. Now, who is worth going after like that? I think again, you would have to think that you're gonna be in, at least pretty decent contention and have a player who either could be retraded at the conclusion of the Steph era or could be the foundation of a new era, or at least the conclusion of the Steph Butler Draymond era. Steph may still be playing 3 or 4 years from now and still be pretty good the way he's aging. Anybody out there fit that bill for you?
Other than Giannis Antetokounmpo, there aren't a ton, and Giannis, that trade he makes too much money to be the combinations we were talking about before. That would pretty much have to be Jimmy Butler, or you could do Draymond Kuminga. There are a couple other mechanisms, but we've talked about Giannis plenty, and Giannis is the exception to everything because he's that good. Markkanen, I think to me, Markkanen he's a very, very good player, and he makes sense with some of the Warriors' best players, but part of the vision of going whole hog for the Warriors is a guy who can be like kind of a focal point of the next year. And I think Markkanen he's a very good player, but if that's your goal, because the Warriors don't have a lot of mechanisms to add star level talent in the near term because their picks aren't going to be good enough in the near term in all likelihood unless there's some serious injuries to get better. So like Markkanen, he's going to help you a lot during the near term, but then what is he going to be after that? So I would do a lot of that for Giannis. I would not do it for basically anyone else.
Yeah, now they could also go. Yeah, and I think they may be still trying to hold out for a bigger fish. They've been playing better recently in terms of just what they need in terms of with a non-star player. I've said this a bunch of times. It's basically they need prime Klay Thompson back, and they've gotten D'Anthony Melton back from injury. He's been playing really well. How long is he going to actually stay healthy is certainly a question. Don't know the answer to that one, and I still think this is a group that might be able to pull off one crazy upset in the playoffs, but not beyond that necessarily. And I don't know if there's just a starter level of player that would change my opinion on that. It'd be great. Like Trey Murphy the third might be that guy, supposedly not available. And John was saying Trey Murphy, he thinks he could get a near Desmond Bain like package. I don't know that that's the case, but it probably would take 3 firsts to get it done. I would say for Trey Murphy. Now, part of the appeal of acquiring him is if you then needed to retrade him, you could probably get some of that equity back, 2 years from now or something, if it looks like the team's just gonna have to bottom out. But you wouldn't be able to get your own picks back. And I mean that one's kind of right on the board. I mean, what do you think of like 3 firsts for Trey Murphy? Basically
I
Kaminga and filler.
I think that's probably a little rich for me. I love Trey Murphy, but I think that he helps the Warriors, but I don't think he fundamentally transforms them. And
Yeah.
for the
Like,
Warriors,
what are they even a top 4 team in the West after that trade?
I don't think
Maybe
they
as a
are.
playoff team, they might, if they played the Rockets in a playoff series with Trey Murphy, I might think, yeah, they got a pretty decent chance. They wouldn't have home court. But yeah, I mean, just get to actually fully get there. No, I think that's not really something I'd be looking to do.
And for the Warriors in particular, the idea, because if you get up to 3 firsts, some of those are going to have to be further out. And considering the age and kind of the talent on their rosters, those firsts, especially if they're unprotected, could be pretty valuable. They could be pretty desirable around the league. So I think you're doing that for a real game changer. And I love Trey, but he's not a game changer.
No, and so to me, unless it's a superstar player, while I am all about trying to maximize this era for Steph Curry and put a competitive team around him, like they made a trade for Jimmy Butler, like an all-star level of player. Like they still have Draymond Green making money. Like they've tried to do stuff, but the whole draft trade for a guy who's not as good as Steph Curry, yeah, or close to whole draft that then also either hamstrings the organization rebuilding in the post Curry era or prevents them from making a play for a guy at a later point who might even be better than Steph, like a Giannis. Yeah, I don't think that that makes a ton of sense. And beyond that, who is, yeah, could they use another creator? Sure. But they have a billion of these shooting guards already. Like, if they, let's say Kobe White, who's been bandied about for them. Number one, I think he's got a pretty small cap hold. Like, the Bulls are going to use cap space. I don't think they would be interested at maybe even for two firsts, right? So again, that's not a guy who's going to get them there. Would it be 26 first and 27 swap? But I mean, Chicago, that doesn't help a lot, right? So even that level of player, Kobe White, would probably help them. Is he for sure gonna close all the time? Like, he and Steph in the backcourt, like, that's a little
Very
rough
small.
defensively.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're small in the front court as well. I mean, the other thing they could try to go for is just, a more dynamic center. Zubats again, I mean, the Celtics to me have a lot greater motivation to go after him. Other teams that would beat the Warriors offer to me. So, is there a, this year's Dorian Finney-Smith type of player that they would just trade Kuminga for? They also want to hold on to that matching salary slot, right? And they have
Mhm.
Kuminga on a team option for next year that they could just opt him into and trade him in the summer potentially.
So one thing that I would consider, and I've heard a little bit on this, is I think that the Warriors should not be reluctant for the right player to take on money going into 27, 28. Now, it is true that they kind of have lined all this stuff up so that their players mostly, not entirely, expire at the same time. But the thing to remember that one, Steph Curry might continue to play, and two, they're not going to use like gobs and gobs of cap space, especially if they're looking at a post Curry era. So, like for
Yeah.
example,
Well,
let's
could we see like Steph just be like, yeah, you know what, I'll sign for 10 million bucks, do like the Dirk Nowitzki for 1 year, and then they bump him up again the next year. Like, could you see something like that?
possibly, but
Yeah.
what I was
But
getting at
that's,
there is
yeah.
let's say one of the offers on the table is something involving Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. Not that the Warriors need another two guard, but I don't think that Moody or sorry that Malik Monk having money going into 27, 28 should be that much of a deterrence. Now you could say that the money being more than you think he's worth, well then that could be. But they have so much expiring right now, and yeah, maybe eventually they'll re-sign Draymond, and that could run into that time. But I could imagine Mike Dunleavy and company trying to hold a pretty firm line there. So I would be more willing to do that for the right player, but that doesn't mean I'd be willing to do it for the wrong player.
Yeah. And so what have you got? Keon Ellis and Malik Monk. Again, these are all the fucking shooting guards. You're gonna trade Kuminga
Got to catch them
for
all.
some shooting guards, right? So it's like Derek Jones Jr. is out right now. Like, that sort of player give you a little bit more athleticism. Yeah, I mean, that's probably a no. I really just don't see, like, Tari Eason would be a pretty good fit, but the Rockets aren't going to trade him. They are going to try to re-sign him, you would think, in the offseason. The Rockets have plenty of picks already. The Warriors aren't going to be able to pry him away because, yeah, they really just need either a small forward or a shooting guard who's more of an offensive threat but can still guard. Like, Monk would give them a different element, but I think they're just like, yeah, Kaminga's our matching salary. Monk would be more difficult as matching salary going forward because that's what you're really thinking. If you're going to acquire Monk, like, yeah, he might help you a little bit now. You might get a little something of an asset from the Kings if you're going to do that. But the Kings, I don't want to give up a first for Kuminga. Yeah, like, what is the trade that is good, right? Especially like if all the players who are available are like shooting guards. They already have all these shooting guards.
I've thought a
Yeah,
little bit about what it would take for them to get Jaren Jackson, which would might maybe involve Michigan State big for Michigan State big if Draymond were
yeah,
involved. But it just gets too thorny for me. I think that maybe you'd have a call, but I don't think you'd have a full on conversation.
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have to. Like, they could do Kaminga and Healed and somebody else. I mean, Pajumski is someone who might have value to another team. I think his star has certainly fallen, but I think they're a team that would be interested in him. Maybe yet another shooting guard. Hilariously, yeah. So, like, is there a big that would be like Claxton would be another instrument? Supposedly, the Warriors are not interested in Michael Porter Jr. Again, that would require them to do Moody and Healed and Kuminga, and that could be decent. But again, like, do you want to go 2 first round picks? Like, I really don't want to go much beyond 27, just on the risk that you could just kind of be done with everything in 27, and Steph is retired, and that's it, right? Like,
Yeah,
most likely to
we're
be
in agreement.
traded, yeah, is
Most
still
likely,
Kuminga. Yeah.
it's Kuminga because they don't have one of those other kind of guys. Like you and I are both skeptical that he's like automatically going to get dealt, but it's still most likely they don't have anybody else.
Well, this is pretty funny. At 11, 18, 25, you and I both did Watfos that Jonathan Kuminga's on the Warriors after the 26 trade deadline. I said 66%. You said 70%. I mean, I would lower that, I think, a little bit, just because he hasn't played at all since then. And he has done this trade demand, which is completely meaningless, by the way.
I thought with your preamble you were going to say, and he was just traded, but no.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we also have a Watfo on Anfernee Simons, whether he'd be on the Celtics after the trade deadline. I said 50%. You said 61% chance. And AD, we said 45% chance I did that he would be traded before the deadline. You said 35% chance. I would be way lower now that he's been hurt so much, and also has this hand issue. Okay. Let's move on to another team then. I mean, it surprised me. I really, maybe I'm just not being creative enough, but or maybe there's just some other player out there. But Kuminga plus a first and maybe a swap and Healed. Like, I don't think that just is going to get a player that wouldn't have a high opportunity cost for the Warriors.
So I think the next team I want to discuss, not as much because I think their roster situation, their trade deadline is so interesting, but because it seems like they're sniffing around everybody, is the Toronto Raptors. And the Raptors are going through this swoon. They really need their 5 best players to be healthy. And unfortunately for the Raps, their 5 best players just haven't been healthy for this last stretch. So what makes the Raptors interesting is that they have a talented roster. They have, but a lot of their players are properly paid. They're more in that vicinity. They don't have these guys that are going to bump up, but they're expensive and they're expensive moving forward. So the Raptors are actually narrowly over the luxury tax right now. There are lots of ways that they could theoretically get under, but it's an important consideration in terms of, well, what kind of a deal would they do? Because maybe Rodgers, maybe they're willing to pay a little bit of luxury tax, but I think they need to be a far better team for that. And so the Raptors, I think it's more, and it'll be fun to work through this with them, but that's why I wanted to do it now while we're kind of wrapping our minds around, is like, okay, they're definitely going to be sniffing around. There's already been the reporting that they're talking with Mavs about Anthony Davis and all this type of stuff. But there are complications with the Raptors. I think the Raptors have interest, but there are complications with them actually executing.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of those. And one of them is what the matching salary is going to be coming back. Another is that their team is already too light on shooting. And like, yeah, they can trade every pick that they want to. So like Murray Boyle probably has a lot of value. At least he should. And Jacoby Walter, I might value him as like a lower end first at this point. They've got some decent players out there. I don't know what Grady Dick's value is these days in his third year. He's been pretty up and down, to mostly down, I'd say, this year. So Anthony Davis, again, there's a possibility of like are you going to not extend him then? And he's going to be pissed off. I mean, it's probably easier for him to not be pissed off when the team that trades for him doesn't extend him, because he's canvassed the league and knows that extension isn't out there. So I'm just not sure though what getting AD does for you. I mean, are they going to win the East with him? They haven't seen in this iteration of the team to have that sort of ambition. But I'm just not. I don't think of like. I mean, their defense is really good already. I don't think AD helps them offensively. He probably actually hurts them, honestly. Like he does. Like they're not really a great pick and roll team anyway, and that's where he would be the most useful. They have a bunch of other guys who want to operate around the basket. They don't have enough shooting, so I don't really see the point of it for him now. That could all be just Rich Paul trying to drum up a market or something. But I think maybe it's time we should take a step back, other than AD, to just say what type of player you really want. To me, it's shooting.
Shooting ideally with capable enough defense that you can play them in big moments. And there are, there are shooters of kind of lots of different levels. Like you could talk about somebody like Sam Hauser who would add some shooting to them overall, but he has his own limitations. I think the Raptors might care in some ways less about those than the Celtics do. But a lot of the shooter types, because remember, so many of these players were available through free agency this past summer, aren't necessarily on the market right now. Of course, you have guys that are way better than just a shooter like Lauri Markkanen, and that's a whole different conversation that I don't think the Raptors are going to get into. Is there anyone else that's kind of sticking out to you as a potential fit, either on kind of the lower or the higher end?
Well, Porter Jr. certainly
Mm.
is one that comes to mind. Now, his fit with Ingram and Barnes is questionable on the defensive end. I don't think they're willing to trade Ingram. I think they should honestly look into that a little bit. Because he's just not shooting quite enough for me. And I think Barrett is a little bit harder to trade than Ingram, and they're kind of the same in terms of offensive players. But Barrett is a shooting guard, and if you added Porter Jr. to kind of to play the three, essentially, like Ingram for Porter Jr. would be a pretty fascinating challenge trade. Ingram is someone who, in theory, has the more value, but the Raps to me with Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, they just have a lot of guys who kind of do the same sort of attacking off the dribble. If you throw an Ingram there as well, now that maybe one of the strengths of their team is that you have to guard all those guys, but it hasn't worked amazingly well on the offensive end. And so I would be willing to trade Ingram. We shouldn't spend that much time on it because I don't think they're going to. They also, we still, another piece of information that we don't really have is what is the injury status of Jakob Pertl. And just for a reminder, everyone, 19 and a half this year, 19 and a half next year, then an extension for 27, 29, and then a partial guarantee in the 29-30 season when Jakob Pertl will be 34 years old for 27 million. That guarantee is based on minutes played. Pretty complicated formula there, but he could possibly reach it. If he's not going to play it all this year, then they feel like maybe they need another center. Like I like Murray Boyles. You don't want to just have him be your only quote unquote big man, though. They do need somebody else with a little more size. Like Pirtle for Gafford and give up your 26 first. It's probably not enough from Dallas' standpoint because Pirtle is a bad contract.
Yeah, it wouldn't be enough for me if I were running the Mavericks for sure.
Yeah.
Before I forget on the shooter line, we talked about 3 firsts as a potential line for Trey Murphy. Would you consider something in that ballpark as the Raps?
Another trade with New Orleans. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably not even worth talking about him that much because he supposedly isn't available. But yeah, because this is, I don't see them as a possible destination for a big star. I mean, it might be one of those deals where you would want to do it at the draft and do like 26, 27, and 29 as opposed to having, because now you'd have to go out all the way to 30 if you did it now.
Seppian, yeah.
I still don't like, he would help them for sure. I think he would fit in really well. I mean, 3 firsts is just a lot though. Are they taking back Pirtle?
Well, yeah, I mean, because if Quickly's in the deal, then that changes things for Dumars and company. Maybe they value him a little bit. He's under team control for another couple of years. We don't know what's going on with DeJounte Murray. I mean, he's definitely better salary than Pirtle is, considering the
Yeah.
years and everything else.
The other thing we have to consider is these guys are slightly over the tax,
Hmm.
um, and they'll probably want to move someone there. I mean, I guess that's Jonathan Mobo is probably your biggest candidate.
It feels like it would be Garrett Temple, but they've deliberately
Oh
signed him the
yeah.
last few years, and so they haven't done that when they could have. They could have just not signed him.
Well, they had to sign somebody, I guess. But yeah, moving on from him might give them. Let me see if that would give them enough room.
But my instinct is,
Yeah, I think they would be okay if they moved on from him and just replaced him with him at the end of the year. By my quick math that I'm doing right now, they would be just under. So yeah, I think that's probably right. Actually, he's probably the most likely to get traded. Hilariously,
they could also potentially, if there was one of their kind of like rookie scale guys, they were willing. I'm not saying cut bait, meaning like you get rid of them for nothing, but like maybe that's Ochai Abaji or one of these guys, and you get maybe a second or something like that. Shed some money that way. It's another possibility.
yeah, Warriors could use a shooting guard. But yeah, certainly this is they do not want to finish this year in the tax, and if they really wanted to take on some money, they could, but not much because they have a bunch of contracts that have incentives in there. Like Barrett has a bunch of incentives, so they're actually not much further below the first apron than they. Yeah, so I misspoke there. They cannot really take on any extra money, even if they wanted to, because of these incentives. They're only about a little less than a million under the first apron. So that again, I'm not perfectly up on Barrett's incentives, but that's what we have here. Hopefully, Dan's got it pretty close. All right, let's. I, I guess I'm just not. I know they're like trying to do something like the John Morant thing. I guess we should talk about that.
Well, and then
Doesn't really make any sense
Sabonis.
to me either.
Sabonis makes even less sense to me.
Yeah, so that deal is Barrett and Pirtle.
And then presumably firsts plural, I would guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like Sabonis. Like if there were like his fit next to Barnes defensively is not bad. I just don't think Sabonis has played well offensively the last couple of years. Like he doesn't like he can finish some plays around the basket pretty well. Like aren't they? I mean, I realize they're not considered the same level of guys. Like Sandro Monikashvili has been a defenseless big who scores pretty well, and he can actually shoot some threes.
Well, also I don't think that as I see them, I don't love the Raptors guards with Sabonis. Like I like guys who can be a little bit quicker, who can do some of the stuff that Fox could do, and
Yeah, they got or they got to be able to shoot right. Like what really the year that Sabonis was most valuable was when he was handing off with guys who could shoot when the defense went under, and then or they were trying to topside, and then he could hit guys with his backdoor passing. I mean, I just like you guys know. I don't think. I mean, I know he's an international player. They love international players in Toronto. I just don't understand what the point of him would be. I think he makes you worse on defense and, maybe somewhat better on offense. And then the other question was Sabonis, is he healthy? I know he came back and played 20 minutes on Saturday, but rehabbing a meniscus, being out this long, and we haven't had a chance to see whether he's back in form, whatever that passes for with him these days in terms of people thinking that he's the player that he was. But again, I just don't really see the point of that from Toronto's standpoint. And I think if you're going to take back Pirtle again, that's the Kings. I'm sure would require a pretty penny for that one. Uh, I mean, but God, if Sabonis ended up in Toronto though, like Team Quagmire just becoming like getting another Quagmire player, though I don't know if Sabonis is even like good enough to be a Quagmire player at this point. All right, most likely to be traded probably gotta be Temple, right?
I think so.
Yeah. All right, let's move on here. I will pick the next team. And let's go back to the Pacific Division, talk about the Lakers.
the Lakers, shook the basketball world last year with Luka Doncic. I don't expect that to be the case. They are into the tax, but not too far. They are hard capped at the first apron. So that limits some things about what they could potentially do. And I mean, unless you want to really talk about it, I'm not gonna say I expect LeBron James to potentially get traded. He has a no trade clause first and foremost, and even though there is potential tension with him in the long term vision, I think that there isn't really a way to do that. So the Lakers are in this weird place where they'd love to get better. I mean, they have LeBron James at 41, but they also potentially could wield cap space, like real cap space, in the summer of 2026. And they also have like they how much of their resources do you really want to bring to bear on the trade market when you could potentially go after bigger fish, because the Lakers always do at some other point.
Yeah, as of right now, they can only trade one first round pick, which would be their 2031 first round pick. At the draft, they could trade three first round picks. They could trade 26. Their 27 is owed to Utah, protected 1-4, and does not roll over at all. And then, of course, their 29 first is owed to the Dallas Mavericks. But at the draft, you could trade 26, you could trade 31, you could trade 33. So there's not really much reason to trade your 2031 pick now. Certainly they could use some more athleticism. They still don't really have a solid 3-and-D player. I think Rob Pelinka did about as well as he could, given the assets available. And then, of course, they could have $48 million in cap space this offseason. That's with Austin Reeves having a $20.9 million cap hold. Now, if he goes up to near the max, then you could see them maybe running close to the tax if they use all that cap space. But that's hopefully shouldn't be a problem for the LA Lakers to pay some tax if they get the right player in. And of course, they could also just end up re-signing LeBron. Who knows what they? I still don't love their long-term plan, but three firsts and some space that certainly you could. I don't know what's behind all those doors this offseason, but I think I like it a lot more than whatever you could get with one first now. And they also are very low on seconds as well, right?
That is correct. The Lakers already owe their 26. Potentially, I think they're 27. That depends on the protection with the Jazz pick. 28, 29, and 30 and 31 seconds already. So they are extremely limited when it comes to seconds.
Yeah, so they basically got what, 2 seconds that they could trade?
I think it might even be one.
Yeah. And they have some interesting things for next year in terms of DeAndre Ayton, $8.1 million player option. Marcus Smart, 5.4. Smart's played pretty well. You could see him maybe opting out of that. And they do have a bunch of expiring contracts. Vincent, Kleba, Rui Hachimura. But what are you getting for those guys? Like, does Hachimura have some value that would enable you to reorient your team slightly? Because he probably shouldn't be starting at this point next to Luke and LeBron. There's just too many power forwards, too slow. Yeah, I mean, they need some shooting guards. Maybe they should trade Hachimura to the Warriors for I don't
Jonathan
know. Well,
Kuminga.
yeah. Well, I mean that they are. There's some thought that they might be interested in Kuminga. That seems ridiculous to me, particularly because that would eat into their cap space this offseason. Which again, I don't love the options this offseason for them in terms of free agents. But I think again, just having that space and the flexibility, and maybe you could get LeBron to come back for a little bit less, maybe not, but I don't know that there's another team that would love to pay LeBron a max. Yeah, maybe the Clippers
Mm-hmm.
would do it. But again, I'm thinking it's going to be a pretty quiet deadline for LA. They did what they could in the offseason. They're not playing that well lately. They had a nice win tonight over the Raptors. I think that was the first win they had over a 500 team in a month or so. So, you get into a playoff series, you got LeBron, you got Luca, Reeves playing well. Maybe you pull an upset. They are hopefully will be in decent position to avoid the play in, but they also have a terrible, terrible point differential right now. It seems like it could be they could possibly be a buyout destination for some teams, but or some players who get bought out. I just don't really, yeah, like I just wouldn't put my 2031 pick into play right now under any circumstances because that's all you can trade. That's just not going to get you there. So this is
Hmm.
pretty short segment on them, I guess. But
Yeah.
what else is there to talk about with these guys?
I mean, I think we'll probably save this more for their offseason preview. There are a lot of things that you're going to need. If you think that Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves are kind of your foundational pieces, then you need a defensive identity outside of those guys that presumably involves a center and a perimeter defender. And you can use the cap space to acquire some of those things. But the problem is, it's very hard to do that with their resources to do that in season because the Lakers don't really have other guys that teams will value and they don't want to include that pick because they don't know where else they could need it. So I think that unless you're just doing a straight up like a buy low on a player and just kind of seeing where things go, but they also might not want to do so. They can't do a buy low for contractual reasons. They would do it just for like this guy isn't playing with Team X. Maybe he'd help us. Like maybe somebody like Nick Richards or something like that.
Yeah, again, I think that's like not really that clear of an upgrade. And the other thing that should be noted is that they are 6.9 million in the tax. They are actually in the repeater tax this year. Now, let's remember that Mark Walter is taken over and they're probably not going to cheap out on that. I don't think Mark Walter gives a shit about a $21 million repeater tax payment. Could they try to trim that a little bit? Right? Like, could it be we'll trade Kleba for someone making 5 million and give up a second? Is that that's the sort of thing that might make some sense.
Or if a team was interested, I think he's probably negative value at this point in Dalton Connect. You know, like somebody who just would like to see what he can do for a year or two.
Yeah, making 4 million. Um, yeah, shame to see the steal of the 24 draft go out like that though, if it does happen that way. Yeah, Gabe Vincent's another expiring contract, but he's like kind of playing for them. It just the idea of trading them for is there, I mean, I don't think it really would probably have to be just sort of like a Valanciunas for Saric kind of thing with Kleba
Mm.
if there's a team, but I don't think you would, there's a way you could save money if it's Kleba plus a second, save money and get someone who can play. I don't think that's realistic. Kleba plus a second for the same money and get someone who can play. I don't know who is that guy.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, I don't know. This is an interesting question. Haywood Highsmith had this setback and hasn't played yet this year. I don't know what his status is. He makes 5.6. He's with the Nets now. Would you just like could Kleba and a second for Highsmith because the Nets have cap space too, and you just maybe Highsmith comes back and plays at some point. Like he would help them if he were healthy.
I would like that for the Lakers. I think that the Nets could probably do better with their space, personally.
Is that worth two firsts? No, probably
I
not.
mean,
Right?
I'm not even sure they have 2 seconds to trade. So
Or
would
sorry,
be
2 seconds. Yeah, 2 seconds. Um, Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if anyone because they probably wouldn't bring Hachimura back. So, is there someone they could trade him for to save some money that might value his bird rights, and you just get a serviceable bench guy for him? Like another one, like if Matisse Thybulle were healthy for Portland, right? That would it could maybe be interesting, but he just hasn't really been around, hasn't been playing for them. So that kind of a deal. I'm just not sure what else is out there.
yeah, and like for the Lakers, somebody like rolling the dice on Jonathan Isaac isn't worth it because that cuts into your cap space aspirations. There are other teams that might be a worthwhile gamble, but not for the Lakers.
Yeah, Isaac's what he's half guaranteed next year. Now we get to play quiz myself on 8 million
Yeah,
guaranteed out of 14.5 next year. and it guarantees fully if he plays 52 games this year, which he might be on pace to do. Okay. Let's I think we could probably pack it in on these guys. I'm sorry to say. Um does Grant Williams interest you if he shows that he can play well? I don't think so. And that again cuts into the cap space too. I think you have to acknowledge, and I think Pelinka's done a pretty good job of this even before the Luka trade, of just noting that they're not there. And LeBron would love for them to keep throwing good money after bad. Or I mean, I guess it's good money after very good in the Luka trade, if you're going to talk about that. But yeah, it just doesn't make sense at this point. Like they're trying to win a championship with Luka, and to just really give up much to try to you one more guy. I mean, you probably just get someone on the buyout market even. Although they don't have much space below the first apron. I think it's really, they could give up some cash. What's their cash situation? I wonder. That's a good. I don't think they've done anything to give that up yet. But they might even be able. They can sign a player on the buyout market. They got it like about $1 million below the first apron. That was part of the big coup of getting these guys signed for a little bit less in the offseason. All right, most likely to be traded is probably. What do you think?
I kind of want to go Hachimura just because I think teams might be more interested in him, and considering how asset poor the Lakers are, that might be you may do it. I mean, we haven't heard a ton on that yet, but I'll go Rui.
Yeah, they really just don't have sweeteners, unless Connect has some value, which like we said earlier, I don't think so. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Kleba, just maybe in a tax reducing move, because they don't have just like that minimum guy like your Garrett Temple, for example. Let's do two more teams. Where do you want to go next?
Brooklyn. Brooklyn is fascinating. They actually have cap space to wield still. They have a little bit over 15 million that they could use for an imbalance trade or a number of different things. Now, their roster spot situation is a little tricky because they guaranteed some of their guys, but they could always make something happen if they really needed to. And the headliner in Brooklyn, of course, is Michael Porter Jr., who I just picked as my most surprising player of the year so far because he has been a true positive, like, but for the Brooklyn Nets. He's the largest role of his career. He's doing a great job. He's been healthy. He's been huge. And so Porter Jr., you could say, hey, Brooklyn, they're in this unusual circumstance where they don't have their pick they don't have their pick next year, but they do have it for this year. And say, okay, there's a clear incentive to maximizing that. And that's true. But Porter Jr. could help them next year when they don't have their pick. That said, the thing that I would be thinking about, we already discussed Porter Jr. a little bit in a couple other sections, is the possibility he's been durable this year, and the issue he had in the playoffs last year was not related to his back, but he has had that in his history, even though that last year of his contract is fully guaranteed. My thought on this is Michael Porter Jr. probably not going to be a part of the next great Nets team. The iron is awfully hot now. I think that waiting to trade him would be a mistake.
Yeah, and John reported that their thinking is somewhat similar. Now, whether it actually happens or not, who knows? And for him making 40 million next year, yeah, he has been durable, but he could get hurt. Performance could decline, and also he's helping them win too many games this year. That's another reason I think that they would be concerned about it because, as we noted ad nauseum, they don't have their draft pick under control. They swap it with Houston in 27 from the Harden trade, and they weren't able to get it back in that deal with the Phoenix and Dallas picks at the 24 draft. I think a lot of it comes down. Let's say Michael Porter Jr. was solely being traded for expiring contracts, right? So he makes 38 this year, 40 next year. Maybe something you could try to extend in the offseason if you acquired him. But let's say the Nets could take back bad money, and that actually wouldn't. They've got about 39 million in cap space as it stands this offseason. That could grow to about 50 if they move on from Cam Thomas. So that's enough cap space, and taking back money from Porter Jr. wouldn't really affect that because that includes the 40 million that he is under contract already. It might affect things a little bit if they took back more than him using that 15 million because that's part of the structure I talked about with John with him is because they have this 15 million cap space, they could almost do another version of the Cam Johnson deal where they send back someone who could play
Yep.
and take back someone who or multiple someone's with that 50 million in cap space and the salary matching as well. Like they could really offer a team a lot of relief, and maybe that's how you really get up to some big time value. The question is just again who that would be. So I'll spin it back to you. I'm sorry, I've been to runabout about it. With what is his value just on this contract? You trade him for expirings.
Even if Michael Porter Jr. goes to another team and can't do as much of the on-ball stuff that the like kind of the higher usage stuff that he's done this year, harkening back to former net Mikal Bridges doing a lot more with Brooklyn than going back to the Knicks and going to the Knicks and doing less. We still know that he is an absolutely fantastic shooter. He can, he's not a great defender, but he has at his best moments executed within a system. So I think it's probably between like one great first would do it for me, but it's probably more like two firsts and average value just because you don't usually actually see those great firsts go. So I think two firsts would be about right for me. What about for you?
Well, what's the value of holding on to him? I mean, it hurts your draft pick this year. I mean, he's not a star. They could figure out a way to just rust him if they wanted to. Yeah, and they could move him again this offseason if they wanted to do that, but they also could just try to win this next year as well. I don't think they're that concerned about that, even though they don't have their draft pick. We've seen that they're just trying to build, and even when they didn't have their draft pick before, they weren't necessarily chasing the quick fix until they got Kyrie and Kitty, which obviously was a worthwhile gamble, even if it didn't pay off in the end. So I might be a little bit lower than you on that. Now it's worth noting seconds are pretty useless for them. They've got like 3 seconds every year ad infinitum already. Um, and maybe what it would have to be important because they actually have a few other guys who could play as well. And like could say Dayron Sharp, for example, making 6.2 with a team option next year. If you packaged him with Porter and gave some savings, maybe that's how you get to two really good firsts. I don't think just Michael Porter Jr. for expiring contracts. I don't know if that is multiple firsts. And I don't, it's hard for me to think of what team would want to pay that. And ultimately, that's where it comes down to. Now, again, you could argue, well, hey, if that's what it is, just hold on to him. But in terms of just what his value should be without these sweeteners of taking on bad money or maybe throwing in another low end rotation guy or something like that, I don't think it does get to two firsts.
He could benefit from teams like the Pelicans just taking their guys off the market, where it's just like, hey, if you're trying to upgrade, this is a way that you can do it. If we're talking about it just expiring, like I think you might be right, especially with the injury stuff, which I've been harping on fairly for consistently. But I think that there are ways they could do it through taking on money, either through more immediate savings or through long term savings. Like there are ways that they could do that. And as you mentioned, because Porter Jr. makes so much money, it doesn't have to be a one for one. It could be something where you get that through sending two or three guys Brooklyn's way. Now Brooklyn would have to figure out how they're going to make all the roster spots work and everything like that, but I think they could. So, but the problem, like with Porter, with keeping him, is that not only does he make your pick worse this year, but it's the possibility that the value, like what would have to happen? Because remember, Brooklyn isn't making the playoffs this year. What would have to happen for Porter Jr. between now and then to raise his value? So if the offers are weak now, there's a reasonable, like weaker than you'd like. It's probably going to be weaker than you'd like in the summer of 26 because it's a similar situation. Now teams are more flexible. There's some cap space around the league, but generally speaking, like teams are looking to improve. You'd get him for an extra playoff run this year. So like I'm always skeptical, when you kind of need to move a guy and you wait because the offers are weak that's gonna really get better. I've been wrong before. Vooch going from the Magic to the Bulls is the example I talk about all the time. But generally speaking, I think my intuition on this is pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know that there ever really were great offers for Vooch, but yeah, Porter Jr. too. Again, what is the value of holding on to him? I guess another question would be, what would he be willing to extend for in this offseason? Like, you can't do it now, but he could do it this offseason. Could he extend, and then maybe his value would go up a little bit then if he was on a little bit cheaper of a deal, or just again, he could help you win some basketball games this year. I do like that he can fit in kind of anywhere. Maybe the two firsts would come with, let's say it's just like Detroit, who just has a really bright future. You can just assume maybe that both those picks are in the 20s. Because I do like Porter Jr. there. I think they can mask his defensive issues, and also they just need a really good shooter who's better than Duncan Robinson. So I do Tobias Harris and Jaden Ivey. You got any interest in Jaden Ivey if you're Brooklyn? Does he have any value to you?
Yeah, he has some, but he doesn't have a ton. I mean, he's restricted rights. You could squeeze him a little bit, but there are more teams with cap space this year. Yeah, some. I mean, Brooklyn, though they did just draft a bunch of guys with the intention of having the ball in their hands. Yeah, I'd be of some interest. I will flag one team. We've talked about the 1 versus 2 firsts. That if they offered one, I might be interested, and that's the Milwaukee Bucks. And if the Bucks are in that we need to add around Giannis Antetokounmpo mode, and they do have some salary that could go in.
Because it's got to be Kuzma and Portis, basically.
Kuzma and Portis. So if it's Kuzma and Portis for Porter, but they only can offer one first, betting against where the Bucks could be in 2031 or 32, that's a bet I might consider making.
Yeah. Now, from Milwaukee's standpoint, we'll get to them more. But as I've talked about with John, I think they're another one of these teams that can trade one first now, but could trade 3 at the draft. And yeah, Michael Porter Jr. is not getting you into championship contention. Now, okay, that might be another one where, hey, Milwaukee could use Day'Ron Sharpe as well. Or they could, or even someone like Zaire Williams would help them, and maybe you build the deal that way. But again, that's only one first, like you noted. Yeah, 2031 Milwaukee it's pretty attractive. And let's keep in mind that they did a similar deal to get Porter and trade away Cam Johnson. And yeah, now Milwaukee doesn't really need savings at this point. They don't really have bad contracts that they're trying to get off of, other than maybe Kuzma. So yeah, that would be. I do like that. As would I do it for just an unprotected 2031 Milwaukee first? Maybe. And from Detroit's standpoint, yeah, maybe it's this year's first and another lotto protected first in the future, right? It's probably not unprotected necessarily. Yeah, but it's right on the borderline. I mean, I guess the question really is more about, it seems like you're along the lines of whatever the best offer is, you just take it.
Unless it's horrible. Yeah, that's pretty much where I am.
Unless it's just like one first that's in the 20s right now.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think they probably can find a way to shut him down a little bit in terms of the winning too many games problem. But it does make things a little unseemly. They didn't have any trouble shutting guys down last year, however. And Porter Jr. is not subject to the player participation policy. In terms of other guys, we talked about Highsmith already a little bit in the Lakers section. Just no indication that he's healthy, but someone who might be interesting. Again, though, if I'm Brooklyn, do I really? All right, yeah, I guess getting some seconds is nice, but I don't think you're going to get anything positive for Highsmith unless he's able to return the floor and look pretty good.
Yeah, and while I'm not, Nick Claxton and Terrence Mann, both those guys are under contract for another couple years, so you could move them and something like that. But I mean, Brooklyn, I don't know what they would do with an extra 20-30 million in cap space. Like, maybe there's somebody they could go after, but it doesn't really seem like that kind of thing for them. And they don't have their pick for 27. So theoretically, if a team bowls you over, I think, the Nets are in a position where you listen on everyone. But I think for those type of players, I would surprise me if somebody just went with a big offer. Be thrilled if they did, but I wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, man making 15 this year. He's just in the first year of that extension, so he's 15 for 2 more years after this one. Basically, I don't. That is definitely negative value. He's age 29, and he was just dumped this offseason. I think he's helped them a little bit, but not to that extent. Yeah, Claxton is the interesting one, right? What is your price? It seems like you're still lower on Claxton. I'm a little bit higher on him with what he's done this year. I think he has at least emerged as a quality starter at center, and I think he's maybe a little bit overpaid still, but I'd probably rather have him than like Gafford at this point. So one shitty first, is that enough for you to move Nick Claxton?
No, that's not enough. I think that, especially considering what you're trying to do next year, I would say it'd be either a juicier first than that, or some added something of intrigue that could be in a young player, that could be could be even a veteran, that could be a reflip like they're going to potentially do with Michael Porter Jr. But no, just a shitty first is not enough to get it done for me. Just keep him and roll it into next year.
Yeah, and could you turn that into two firsts? I think teams maybe would be willing to do that at the draft when you can trade first basically in back-to-back years and not encumber yourselves way into the future. I do think there's like a little something with Boston there. That's a kind of interesting one. But I agree. I mean, one really bad first for just expiring money, right? Like Boston's first this year, taking back Simons. I don't know. I think I probably, but again, you're at some point you need to start losing some more games, and so that does have some value to move on from these guys and then just rebuild their team with all these picks that they have going forward and the cap space this offseason. Most likely to be traded is Porter Jr., you think?
Yes,
How about the Knicks?
sure. The New York Knicks, another one of these teams that is that is hard capped at an apron, and right at that apron, they're hundreds of thousands away from the second apron where they're hard capped as
Yeah.
well, which means that
Yeah.
they
Leon Rose actually demanded that all players get haircuts before the season just to make sure that they're not going to actually butt up against the apron. Uh, yeah, they are very limited there. I think where we can start is just talking about what they have to trade. The Knicks could trade their own first at the draft. They cannot do so now because they traded their 27 first to the Brooklyn Nets in the Mikal Bridges deal. So you can't trade first in back-to-back years. They can't do that now. They might, but that's again something where another one of these teams where you got your first at the draft this year, and you're probably going to have 2 seconds from Washington, and then they've got a 30 swap they could do. And then they have a 2032 swap, and then they'll have a 33 first rounder. So they could also do two firsts and then some pretty decent seconds at the draft this year. That might be a reason not to be too aggressive at this point. I don't really see what deal is out there that would inspire me to even give up swaps in 30 and 32. This Washington top 8 protected first that is then 2 seconds. I wonder, Danny, if you were the Knicks, would you try to extract something from the Wizards
mm.
to bump up the protection on that pick?
So make it
Washington
like top
has,
12 or something.
yeah, Washington or Lotto protected, right? Now, like, because it actually would be nice for them to be able to play Trey Young and just like not have to worry too much. I mean, they've already shut him down out. It's not a huge issue. I actually think the Thunder should think about this too, although the Thunder have a ton of
Mhm.
seconds. How are the Knicks themselves fixed for seconds?
They have a couple of extras. You mentioned the ones that they're likely to get from the Wizards. They owe a few of their own. So they owe their own in 26, 28, and 29. Oh, and 31 and 30. So they owe a lot of their own first, but then they have extras. It looks like they'll have 2 extras in 26. Then they'll potentially get 2 extras in 27 because the second of the Wizards picks would convey that year. And then they have 2 extras in 28. They have Boston's, but that's protected. I actually think it will be outside of the protection. And then they have the more favorable of Indiana. They'll have the less, I guess they'll have the second most favorable of Indiana and Phoenix. So
Yeah.
that's okay. Like, so that they're okay on seconds. I would say they're not as bereft as a team like the Lakers.
Yeah, I don't think you could extract a first out of Washington, but maybe you could get a
Mm.
couple of seconds because Washington has so many of those anyway.
Could you get them to take on Yabusele?
And does Washington have any players that they would want that aren't making much? I don't think so. No. Yeah, there really isn't anyone that would help them that isn't like part of Washington's future. At least not who would fit in the salary structure. So let's talk about the matching salary aspect then for the Knicks. They have their top 6. I don't think any of these players who are available and like, if you attach a couple of swaps to Mitchell Robinson, you're not getting a way better player than Mitchell Robinson, or same thing with Josh Hart making 19. So their top 6 guys, I think we're going to just assume they're not going anywhere. Miles McBride, again, making 4, just don't like, he's been really good for them and he's such a cheap contributor. You're basically at Yabusele, Pacome Dadiet. They're also at a point where they can't take back, obviously, with their second apron issues any more than they're sending out. If you wanted to throw in like Jordan Clarkson's playing for them, Shamet can actually block a trade, interestingly enough. So you're basically at a little over $8 million in matching salary that you can send out. But Dadier probably looks like bad salary at this point. He's guaranteed for next year. And then Yabusele surely is going to pick up his $5.8 million player option for next year. So that's pretty bad salary. You got some of these seconds. Maybe you could just, by taking the protection off, you get a few more seconds to attach to Yabusele and Dadier, ship them out. In terms of guys making less than 8 million, well, before we get to that, let's just talk about what you'd ideally be looking for that would be realistic for New York.
You could, I mean, adding another wing would be ideal, but they're always hard to get. I think they
Yeah.
have a good, they have kind of good second backup creation in Kolek and Jordan Clarkson. I think if there were an extended injury to Brunson, you're just screwed anyway. So I don't know that you need too
Right.
much there. A depth center, like kind of a third center. Huck Porty's functioned okay there, so I would go wing 1, center 2, creator 3. I mean, especially if Shama came back from the shoulder issue, his shooting looked pretty good in the game against the Warriors that I saw. So like, I think he'll be okay for that role.
Yeah, in terms of someone making less than 8 million, the Knicks won't be a factor in the buyout market because they're over the first apron. So you can, unlike say the Lakers, they would be a team presumably someone would want to go to, but they can't do that. At least not for someone who is making more than the mid-level when they get bought out. I guess like Nick Richards has come to mind for me as just another body. His offensive rebounding would fit in pretty well. I think he'd probably be a little bit of an upgrade on Hook Porty. Maybe not that much so, especially going to a new team. And what do you have to give the Suns to take on Yabusele and his contract for next year? Kind of doesn't really seem worth it. This is also a group that's actually done pretty well, actually just using second round draft picks rather than trading them. Again, the fantasy of Haywood Highsmith actually being healthy would be great, right? He would be exactly what they're looking for. The Clippers getting back into contention, someone like Nick Batum would have been really nice to target with that Yabusele salary slot. Not really an option there. Would you about Jeremy Sohan? Seems like he's not really in the Spurs plans going forward. Hasn't been playing. Yabusele is French. He's actually a decent fit with. He's played well next to Victor on the international level.
But he does have money into next year, and
Yeah,
Sohan that
and Sohan doesn't. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a huge concern for the Spurs. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for them. They're actually a little bit under the cap for next year as of right now. But I guess if they wanted to re-sign Barnes, then maybe it would be a little bit of an issue. But and use the mid level. I mean, it still is ask them to take on bad money. I don't think the Spurs really need, like, you're not giving up a swap for that. I don't think the Spurs really need more seconds.
they
So
need more swaps is what they need.
George, like if George Niang or Kyle Anderson makes too much for the deal we're talking about, if George Niang could come back and be healthy, I think he might be an interesting player for them. But Niang seems like maybe someone that the Jazz are just going to want to keep around on a lifetime 1 year deal because everyone loves his personality so much. Yeah, I just don't see that much out there for them. Like Nick Richards is the one guy that came to mind for me, but that money for next year for Yabusele just makes it tough.
Yeah,
And the
I don't
Suns,
have any
yeah,
fits. You
I
were say.
guess the Suns like are they're pretty low on seconds. Like just having something that they could trade as seconds might be nice, but they're not really at the point where it's like, oh man, having a couple of seconds that we could deal for Royce O'Neal is so valuable to us anymore where they are now. So yeah, I don't really see what the deal would be for the Knicks. I mean, again, they have enough small guards. Those are the players that are most available. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that really, like, okay, Zaire Williams from the Nets. Nets already have a billion seconds too. They're also very invested in Knicks, the Knicks
Mm-hmm.
already with their draft positioning. Honestly, like, what I don't think the Nets want to help the Knicks in any way. Like same thing with Dayron Sharp. I don't think they have the scratch to go get him. So I think, and also you just in terms of trading that 2031 first, yeah, like they can trade stuff at the draft. Could that possibly be enough to get Giannis if they include Karl Anthony Towns? And that's the other thing too is Towns is playing pretty poorly this year. There's no real trade for him at this point in time. Jim Dolan seems very enamored of the roster, although if they continue to win 2 out of every 10 games up until the trade deadline, that could change.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's about all I've got in these guys. I mean, most likely to be traded is probably Yabu, but I
But
mean,
I
I
don't.
guess also
I
like,
think that's a harder trade than some might think. Like it's and like
yeah,
Dadiet is not easy either because he has guaranteed money after this year. I mean, you and I each saw a little bit of intrigue with him in summer league, but like it's not the easiest. Trading. We'll talk about this a lot, but like trading guys with expiring money is so much cleaner for these other teams than getting a guy who has negative money. But that's part of the reason the Knicks want to get rid of him.
yeah. Now, if they move on if they were able to just dump Dadiet completely, it would save them some money. It'd save them about 10 million bucks, but that's I don't. Again, what are they giving up to make that happen? Is there a team that's just straight up interested in him? There didn't seem to be in training camp, and he's done absolutely nothing since then to change that. Maybe it's just a little easier for teams now than it was in training camp when people like their guys more. I don't know. All right, I think we can pack it in here. Thanks so much for listening and or watching. And of course, we've got much more to come this week. We got to get through the rest of the teams in the Atlantic Division, the Pacific Division. We'll get through all 30 by the time we do the mock trade deadline. And the code is mock deadline 26 to get 35% off a year of Dunked on Prime. Talk to y'all again tomorrow.